Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
I'm Elaine Cha. Later in the hour, we'll get to know Marion Middle School's robotics team in South St. Louis. They're gearing up to defend champion status at the Clavicus Project Jamboree. But first, 2 days ago on this program, we talked with Faith Sandler, the executive director of the Scholarship Foundation of St. Louis. We talked about the lasting effects of student loan debt. We also asked you to share your stories about paying off student loan debt while your children prepare to take on their own higher ed loans. In other words, the idea of generational debt within families in real life. Our producer Maya Norfleet spoke with two St. Louis families about their experience with student loans and how it has shaped whole household conversations, options, and decisions.
Student loan debt is a burden to millions of Americans. Taking out loans and completing a college education can be the key to unlocking future earnings. But time and time again, we've seen how taking out large loans play a role in slowing down financial success for families across generations. We asked for your stories about student loan debt and how you talk about it with your families, especially with children who are interested in attending college or for those who are currently enrolled. We heard from 53-year-old Ronald Glenn of St. Louis. Ronald took out student loans for his undergraduate and graduate degrees and has made payments steadily over the years. For him, it was never a question of whether his children would attend college. In his household, he said, it was a rule. You had to go to college. So when it came time for his daughter Zakiya to consider college, he and his wife encouraged her to apply for scholarships.
We were going to apply for whatever scholarships that were out there. We were going to help her. That was our partnership with her. We were going to help her go through every scholarship, put in wherever we can to help her with this. Work with the school counselor, work with whoever we had to see if we could get enough scholarship money where she didn't have to pay any money for school, because I couldn't be on a loan for her.
Ronald gave his daughter advice for how to pay for college as she was growing up. Zakiya, now a freshman at St. Louis University, remembers that advice from as far back as middle school. Even when she was younger, she was coming up with a plan to pay for school.
I initially always wanted to stay in Missouri for my first 4 years of college, just to keep things easy for me, especially if I need to reach out for help or any financial help from family and others. So I always wanted to be in St. Louis. I really didn't know how I was going to pay for college. I think the main thought process that was going in my head was just get into college, just keep my grades up, get into college. That's all that matters, and the money will come afterwards. I didn't really want to take out any loans because I knew I had to pay it back at a certain time.
When Ronald, his wife, and Zakiya sat down and talked about finances and how they'd pay for a college education, Ronald said they had honest talks.
We had that conversation with her as far as how to pay for school, that it probably would be difficult for her mom and I, seeing that I was currently, a fresh graduate of Washington University, and I had a lot of money. And that was my graduate degree, and I was also I'm an almost graduate of UMSO School of Social Work. So that money was in a loan form that I had to pay back. So that was always on the table, but we didn't want it to be our daughter's worry. We were going to worry about this when what college, that we were going to get into first. Where does she want to go? And then we're going to go into the financing, how we're going to make that happen after that.
Zakiya received support from her parents and guidance from her high school. She also landed an interest-free loan from the Scholarship Foundation of St. Louis, an opportunity she discovered during her extensive research on student aid.
My school has a website that they go to, which is called the Scholarship Central, where every scholarship is uploaded on this website plus loans, and you apply by using just your FAFSA, any additional information about you in school and extracurricular activities, plus how your grades are. And I went on there, made an account, and I was on my last string looking for scholarships because my deadline was coming up, and the Scholarship Foundation just came up on a random tab, and I clicked on it, and I just filled it out, and I just prayed and hoped that they would give me a call back, and which they did, which was very lucky of me.
That's Zakiya Glenn talking about her journey to college. We also heard from Erica Sanders and her daughter Michaela from St. Louis. When Erica first enrolled in college in 1992, she majored in education. Later in 2006, she studied organizational studies. When Erica decided to start her family and begin working to provide for her household, she decided to stop her studies for the moment, but the loan payments continued.
My struggle with paying off my student loans, it has been over many years now. I have started and stopped school a few times, so I have compound debt that I have never managed to put any type of dent in. So originally when I first even started looking into paying back my student loans, when I started getting the letters about it and everything like that, I was only working part-time. And so based on my income, I didn't really have anything to pay back. And then, of course, as I went on to start working full-time, they were asking for me to pay, a minimal amount, but still it felt like a lot to me because I was still making a minimal amount of money. Since then, fast forwarding into my current situation, I am acquiring more debt as they are asking me to pay it off because I am back in school and looking towards my daughter going to college.
During Erica's college experience between 1992 and 2006, Erica got married and became a mother to 3. Erica's youngest child, Michaela, who's a high school senior, was not too concerned about how she was going to pay for college. But recently, reality has started to set in.
I think the more now that I'm actually applying for colleges and having to look into the pricing of schools, look into the pricing of the pricing breakdowns of how much it would be per year, I say that it is kind of overwhelming a bit because it's just a lot to think about. What I want to study under is more than just 4 years sometimes. And I know that that's a lot more schooling and a lot more money. I never really questioned the thought if I wanted to go to college because I did and I wanted to get that experience.
Michaela wants to study psychology, which can take 5 years to earn an undergraduate degree as a full-time student. Her mom, Erica, is back in school studying communications at Fontbonne University. Erica says she's excited to be back in the classroom, but she's crunching the numbers to find ways to pay for her degree as an adult learner.
I literally was on the phone with my advisor this morning, or on a Zoom call with my advisor this morning, and as we were looking at classes, I was sitting there with my calculator trying to think, okay, if I take this many credit hours, then it's going to equal this much, and then what can I put on a credit card, or what can I do? What is it that I can pay for out of pocket so that I am not increasing my loan debt? And it really made me think, do you want to keep trying to do this? It's really discouraging. It has been one of the reasons that I've had to stop and start throughout my life. It is not the main reason, but it certainly does add to my thoughts of whether this is something that I can achieve.
Erica said it's tough to go back to school now, but she's thankful that she's able to move forward with her education to gain skills as she advances in her career. At the same time, she says she thinks about how much her student loan debt has held her and her husband back financially.
It has been the reason that we have gone so long as renters and not homeowners. And it took advancement in my job. It almost makes me want to cry. It took advancement in my job for us to be in a position to be able to be homeowners. And even then, we weren't able to do it together because that just, it weighs down on our credit score. It's being able to, when I first got a vehicle as an adult, I had to have my mother as a co-signer. I wasn't able to, get my vehicle outright. We've had to do some cutting corners and doing some different things and not, really being able to just live to the standard that we feel like we've worked hard for.
Erica's daughter, Michaela, has applied to 4 colleges, 3 in Missouri and 1 out of state. She says she realizes how fast she's had to grow up in such a short amount of time.
As I'm wrapping up my senior year, it makes me really think back and realize why my parents were so, kind of strict on me and hard on me about keeping my grades up and to make sure even if my friends were doing something else, that I had myself together before anything goes. I am kind of growing up and I'm about to be on my own for a little while, and it's kind of really starting to set in. And I think that for anyone, that it should really be enjoy it while you have it, and even as you move on, to continue to enjoy it. I am excited to go to college, a little nervous, a lot of bit nervous, but still ready and excited to see where the future's going to take me.
That was Michaela Sanders and her mom, Erica Sanders. And earlier, we heard from Zakiya Glenn and her father, Ronald Glenn. They all shared their student loan debt stories with producer Maya Norfleet. We need to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk with Nick Hillman, professor in the School of Education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His research examines the ways policy, finance, and geography determine educational opportunities in the U.S. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. Before the break, we heard from 2 local families sharing what they've experienced dealing with school loan debt that stretches across 2 generations of higher ed students, parents, and children. Nick Hillman is a professor in the School of Education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He joins us today to provide context and insights around multi-generational student debt from a national scope perspective. Nick, welcome.
Thank you for the invitation.
You've just heard from 2 St. Louis families, the Glenns and the Sanders. Do their stories align with what you've seen in your research?
They do. They humanize what we see in the research. Oftentimes, student loan research focuses on numbers that round up to billions and trillions of dollars and millions of individuals, and sometimes lost in that are the lived experiences of what it's like to be being told to go to college and take out loans because it'll pay off, and then it not working.
Now, let's take a step back a bit. Can you tell us how and why the federal student loan program even started?
Great place to begin. One of the major places where the federal government got involved with federal student loans and lending to students was in the 1950s. In fact, it was connected to national defense. The National Defense Education Act created the first major federal loan program for college students. And then in 1965, the Higher Education Act kind of expanded upon that and codified a lot of the loan programs into a more stable kind of federal policy. So we're talking mid-1950s, early 1960s, at a time when the country still had not reckoned with a lot of the racial inequalities legally that were on the books.
Now, the mid to late aughts, which is a little bit later in some ways of thinking, a lot later in other ways of thinking, saw the introduction of income-driven repayment plans, which, dare I say, sounds just based on language, almost kindly, or at least responsive. Yet that approach is at the root of many issues, and that's something Erica Sanders alluded to earlier in the show. Nick, what are income-driven repayment plans, and what are they supposed to do?
Income-driven repayment plans, there are several different ones. You might have heard of income-based repayment or pay-as-you-earn or similar programs like this. These tie monthly payments, monthly student loan payments, to the individual borrower's earnings. And so in Erica's case, she had mentioned being in and out of employment, working part-time, for example. These are examples of economic hardships that might qualify someone to participate in one of these income-driven repayment plans, and by doing so can reduce monthly loan payments or in some cases even make them zero.
Now, in terms of effects, we did hear some from Erica. What effects do income-driven repayment plans have on borrowers in the longer term, particularly for those who, like mom and returning student Erica, have a child about to start college?
Wow, there probably two different things come to mind in terms of the effect of these income-driven plans. One of the effects is more theoretical than anything else. In theory, it's supposed to allow the borrower to participate more fully in the economy. And that was something it sounded like Erica was expressing, not feeling fully included in the economy. And so these plans are supposed to be doing that. At the same time, there's a real specific benefit. If you're participating in these income-driven plans, then loans could be forgiven after a certain period of time. And the sort of downside of this is that oftentimes your balance ends up growing during that time. So you actually owe more than what you took out.
And how common is that for people to owe more than the original amount they borrowed?
A recent analysis from the New York Federal Reserve just looked into this, and it was around 40% or so of borrowers were owing more than what they originally took out. And so those numbers, I'm sure, could vary depending on region or certain circumstances, but it is a sizable number of borrowers who are in this situation, and it's not the borrower's fault. It's not because they're not making a payment. It's actually by design. The repayment policies are designed to grow in that way.
Nick, you study policy around federal student loans, which you've said haven't changed that much over time. If the first federal student loan program started some 65 years ago, why has this area of policy development stagnated?
That is the big question. I think that's the thing that the politicians in Washington, D.C. now are starting to wrestle with more than ever before that I've seen. These federal loan programs that originated in the 50s and 60s, their basic DNA is still with us today. And that is they're mortgage-style loans where borrowers take out debt and they repay it from their future selves. They repay it over a course of 10 years. And there aren't a whole lot of consumer protections. That was true then, and it's still true now. But the big part that has changed, in the 1950s and 60s, public colleges were still highly segregated on racial and ethnic lines. They still are today, but it was legally sanctioned around that time. It's a artifact of a Jim Crow era, and a evolution into a civil rights era that the student loan program was created, and we're in a very different era now where I think public policymakers are taking proactive stances and trying to dismantle those systems of inequality that have lasted for 65 years or more.
Mm-hmm. And then this leads to this question then about who is most hurt by that lack of policy development. You're talking about sanctioned segregation. Who suffers the most because of this lack of development?
This is my own theory on this. There's no true proof to this yet. However, I would say that people of color and black men and black women in particular have consistently been disenfranchised by the lending system, not only needing to borrow more money to go to college, but then in the labor force don't have the same kind of return on that investment, even for the same degrees, and therefore don't have the capacity to repay their loans. And so that was true in the early 60s and 70s and into the 80s, and it's been true today. My theory, though, is that now more white upper class and white middle income families are being exposed to debt, to student loan debt, and they're realizing how tough it is. And this is a truth that has been there for a generation, for black families in particular. And I think now interests are converging in a way where there's political interest in this, not just because of the civil rights and inequalities that it could deal with, but also the politics are right.
I'm speaking with Nick Hillman, who is a professor in the School of Education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And we're talking today about multi-generational school debt and whom it affects most severely. So we're here in St. Louis, and you've just mentioned, or you mentioned earlier, that study that came out from the New York Fed. Were there any things that were illuminated about what St. Louis families, what they experience around some of the issues that have come up?
Not in that report particularly, but a couple years ago, the New York Fed did another analysis. And as a side note, the way that they get their data are from credit bureaus, credit card companies. That's how we get most of our data on student loan debt, even though these are federal aid programs. The federal government is not even putting out a lot of data in the way that I think is necessary. That New York Fed analysis, though, looked closely at 10 of the most segregated communities, metro areas in the U.S., and this was at the request of Senator Cory Booker. The most segregated communities in terms of student loan debt and repayment, and St. Louis was included in that analysis. In fact, about 25% of borrowers who lived in what the feds called majority minority communities, presumably communities of color, 25% of loans were in default in these places. And then if you look at places around St. Louis area where they were majority white, the default rate was around 10%. And this just is a red flag that you see across the country, not just in St. Louis, but it was highlighted in that report. And it says to me there are deep structural and economic inequalities in these places where segregation is reinforcing a lot of the problems that we have in our lending system.
And I think that gets to an important point, that what we're experiencing locally very much reflects what is going on in other parts of the country. Your research also examines the roles, that is, that policy, finance, and geography play in shaping educational opportunities. What does that mean, and how does it show up in folks' everyday lives?
One of the most accessible ways I think about this is, I know several years ago we heard a lot about food deserts. We heard about places around town that maybe don't have access to nutritious, affordable food. We can see these kinds of geographic inequalities far beyond food. We can see it with healthcare, we can see it in our schools, and we can see it in our colleges as well. And so geography shapes our lives in so many fundamental ways. It shapes our opportunities, the opportunities to have employment, the opportunities to have nutritious food, the opportunities to pursue an education. And so these are hard, kind of sometimes arguably intractable problems that have just accumulated over years of segregation and years of inequality. And at the same time, optimistically, these are strategies for trying to address these deeply rooted problems locally and geographically. Think about regions and places, and those might be opportunities to really make some progress on some of the policy problems that federal and state policymakers are interested in.
Again, we are speaking with Nick Hillman, who is a professor in the School of Education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Nick, insofar as developments that we've seen around federal student loan policy, there is the Public Service Forgiveness Program, and that's the program that forgives federal student loans for borrowers who work full-time for eligible nonprofit organizations and repay loans on time for 10 years. Can you share what motivated the implementation of that program and what changes have been made to it since?
Yes, and earlier the gentleman Ronald was referring to his education as his pursuit of a social work degree. So I have Ronald in my mind of somebody who is going into a public service, a social work degree. For example, social workers, last I knew, don't make a lot of money, and neither do a lot of public service jobs in terms of, at least compared to private sector jobs. So part of the motivation of the public service loan forgiveness is stemming from that fact. It's stemming from the fact that college is expensive and more people cannot pay out of pocket and rely on loans. And yet their career path is not one that's going to have a high financial upside. And so there were programs, that were actually dating all the way back to, I think, the 70s and 80s are some of these original programs. But the major public service loan forgiveness program started about in 2007 or so. And so if you're in these jobs for 10 years, in these public service jobs for 10 years, and you have loans that qualify, then you could have your loans forgiven with a big asterisk. That asterisk is that there's a process you have to do to apply for forgiveness, and that process has been found to be pretty burdensome. It's getting better, but it's been very difficult.
When we spoke with Faith Sandler, who is the executive director of the Scholarship Foundation of St. Louis, just a couple days ago, we had talked about how complicated FAFSA is and some of these official means by which we have to submit information. Why is it so complicated?
There's so many answers to this. I think one answer is this sort of ethos of we have to protect against waste, fraud, and abuse. So policymakers want to make sure that any kind of public subsidy isn't going to be wasted or exploited. And so you have all of these bureaucratic hoops to sort of prevent that from occurring. Whether or not it's a real problem is a different issue. But I would say a lot of the design comes from that kind of style of government. It's very much individualistic and very much pessimistic about how people are going to interact with their government systems. There could be other ways. There could be simpler ways to design these policies. But again, we're so entrenched with the way we did it in the 1960s and through the years that those kind of changes are going to take some pretty significant steps.
And are you seeing any signs of improvement? And if so, who's driving those changes?
Yeah, there are signs of improvement, and there are a lot of places to improve moving forward. I would say the Office of Federal Student Aid, which is an agency within the Department of Education, they've actually been really constrained with their budgets, and they're responsible for a lot of things going on with our loan system, and they're also proactively trying to make this system work better. But it's hard to do with one hand, tied behind your back as they are. So there's one piece of this. And these are bureaucrats running these agencies. They aren't, they're not running for office. These are folks who are just trying to help. And so that's one place to look. But another thing is that different politicians are building some of their campaigns, as we have seen with President Biden. They're building part of their campaigns around issues that deal with college affordability, student loan debt, the simplification of financial aid, and so forth, because it touches millions of people.
Now, if policy around federal student loans continues to go unchanged. You've talked about some of the things that are looking a little more optimistic, but if they don't change enough for the majority of borrowers, Nick, what do you predict will happen in the long run to higher education and the education of the American populace, which is not just numbers, as you said at the beginning? We're talking about humans.
Yes, and I don't want to just sound alarmist or doom and gloom, but I am worried. I'm worried about the future and what path we're on if nothing changes. We already have extreme inequality in our educational systems. We have rich colleges that serve very privileged students, and they're doing great, and they're becoming less accessible to a nation that needs these colleges to help promote social change and social mobility. So I'm worried, and I'm worried because what's going to happen is people are going to make their educational decisions based on finances, and they should not be making educational decisions on finances. They should be making educational decisions on their educational goals and the way that they can help pursue those educational goals. Finance can stand in the way.
Nick, thank you so much for being on with us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
This episode was produced by Maya Norfleet.
Our production intern is Avery Rogers.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Our podcast proudly supports St. Louis artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri-St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.